So now let us get down to business. We are going to get some hands-on by developing a Spring MVC application the legacy way. This hands-on will act as a refresher for Spring developers with 3 to 5 years of experience. This hands-on will also help us in understanding some of the required annotations that will help us in understanding the working mechanism of Spring Boot. This application we are developing is intended to be deployed on a Servlet 3 container. So we need a Servlet 3 container implementation. We will be using Apache Tomcat version 8 as our Servlet 3 implementation. So step 1, let us get the Apache Tomcat server. Go to Google as usual, type in Apache Tomcat, go to the downloads section. You can see different versions of Tomcat available out there. We are content with Tomcat 8 as of now. So if you come down, you can see in the binary distributions section, there are different versions, different architectures of Apache Tomcat 32-bit and 64-bit. As I told you, I am using Windows 10 64-bit. So this is what I will be downloading. So please download the software. It is a zip file, so there is no setup program. Just unzip it to a location of your choice. Once it is done, come back to the Eclipse IDE. Those who are familiar with the Eclipse IDE will know the different perspectives available. By default, when you open Eclipse, it will be in the Java EE perspective for developing Java EE applications. So you can see there is a servers tab. So in the servers tab, right click somewhere, click on new and click on the server. There are different server implementations available. We will be using Apache Tomcat for the time being. We will complicate things further going forward, but as of now, let us keep it simple. So Tomcat 8 is what I am choosing. You can specify any name for the host name and also for the server name. Let it be localhost for the time being, and the server name is also default. Clicking on the next thing, you can see the name of the Apache and the installation directory. It is already here because I had already configured it there. If not, click on the browse and select the location where you have unzipped your Apache Tomcat. And the last thing is to select the JRE. If you remember, in the previous session we had configured the JDK, so you can definitely leave it with the default workbench JRE, but I am being more specific here, so I am selecting the JDK. That's all for configuring Apache Tomcat. Click on finish. Some more things that we need to configure is that if you leave everything for default, it will use the workspace metadata, that is the folder location used by Eclipse. But I prefer to use the Tomcat installation itself. So instead of using the workspace metadata, I will use the Tomcat installation, and inside that, so the Tomcat installation for me is available in my F drive inside the My Java folder where the Apache Tomcat is installed. Inside the Apache Tomcat folder, I have a web apps folder where the application will be deployed. Once it is done, we are okay, or we are done with configuring Apache Tomcat. Now we are all set to start developing our first application. If you remember, we had installed a plugin called the Spring Tool Suite. We are going to use that plugin to develop a Spring legacy application. There are many ways to create a project in Eclipse. Once you become familiar with the Eclipse environment, it wouldn't be hard to find out the different ways. So let us go the basic way. I will click on the File menu, click on New, So as you can see, there are different types of projects that you can create based on the plugins that you have. Here, we will select the Spring Legacy project. It will open up a wizard for you. The first name that you are going to give is the name of the project. I will give it Spring Legacy. From the templates, we are going to select Spring MVC plugin. That's all. Click on Next. The second page of the wizard asks for the top level package. I will give Spring com.spring.legacy. So we are now done with creating the application. So click Finish. Now let us expand the project the wizard has created. Almost always, the first thing any developer should be doing is project management. So let us open up the pom.xml file and see its content. Hope you are already familiar with Maven, but as a brief, Maven is a software project management tool where developers use it to manage the project dependencies, the project builds, reporting, documentation, and such from a single location. So as we can see, this POM file has the top project element, then the XML namespace. You need to know about XML schema to understand schema namespaces better. But in brief, XML schema is used to define the elements that can appear in an XML document, of which you can see the properties elements, the dependencies elements. So these are the elements that should appear in an XML or in the POM XML file based on the schema. So we can see in the properties section we have the Java version specified as 1.6, the Spring Framework section specified as 3.1.1.release, that is the Spring version. We will skip the remaining discussion for now and look at what else the wizard has created. So now let us expand the source folder. You can see there is the main. So this is the project structure the wizard has created. This is the standard JEE structure or the web application structure for Maven. So we are going to expand on web app inside the webbenef. The first file that we are going to look is the web.xml file. Any JEE developer should know. We call it as a deployment descriptor. Here you can see two bean definition files. One is the root context.xml file, which is located inside the webinf Spring folder, and there is another, the servlet context.xml file. So I'm saying we have two bean definition files here. So this is the this context param is the root application context. So the definition of the root Spring container shared by all servlets and filters. Just as a brief, of course, after this, the context param, we have a listener element where it is pointing to a context loader listener. So why is this configuration here? This context loader listener actually loads up the root application context. So in a brief, why I'm not going to expand on this further, because I'm expecting that this knowledge is already available to you. So what I'm telling, just as a refresher, if you don't have a root application context shared by other application contexts, you don't need to have this context loader listener. Okay, so the only thing that you need for a Spring MVC development or a Spring MVC application is the configuration of the dispatcher servlet. And as you may be aware, each dispatcher servlet has its own application context, and where exactly this is the application context we are talking about. So here, if we again expand the Spring, which the root context and the servlet context.xml file is located. If you look at the root context.xml file, there are no beans defined because we haven't defined any beans yet. And then we have the servlet context.xml file. Here you can see we have the beans, we have the XML schema and the other schemas being used in this XML file. You may be aware that mostly we will be using the beans as the default schema, but that is not the case in this document created by the wizard. It is the MVC which is the default schema. So all those elements coming from the MVC schema need not be prefixed. So that's why there's an annotation driven, which means that the Spring framework should scan for classes in a particular location and find out the annotations and where exactly is the packages located or scanned from. It is from the com.spring.legacy, which is our root, which is, you can see here is the com.spring.legacy package that was created by the wizard, and we gave this particular name, the com.spring.legacy, as the top package name. Then the other thing are the resources, where you can put CSS, JavaScript and the static files into this particular location. And the last thing is the internal resource view resolver. Here we are using JSP as the view, so we are specifying where exactly the view is located and what exactly is the suffix for that particular file. The same, you can see it is inside the webinif views. So if you expand on the webinif views, you can see the home.jsp page. But before we go into the home.jsp page, let us look at the default classes the wizard has created. So you can see the whole project structure has been created. The top level package is also here, and a controller with the name home controller has been created for you by the wizard. So when we open up, we can see the familiar controller annotation. As I'm again reiterating, this session is for Spring developers with 3 to 5 years of experience, so it may not be that difficult for you to understand what a controller. We call, as a brief, we call it these types of annotations as stereotyped annotations, because we stereotype a particular Java class as a particular so this particular home controller will act as a controller. The next thing that we have to see is that there is a request mapping annotation decorated on a home, which is another method we called as the handler method. So the request mapping, so why we use request mapping? If you remember, we use the request mapping to map the URLs onto an entire class or to a particular handler method. So here we are using this request mapping to map a particular URL. Here it is the root URL to the method home. The code inside the handler method is not that difficult to comprehend even. We just create a date instance, format that particular date into a particular format, change it into a string. And what we do, we add that particular formatted date string into a map model. This model that we are passing in is a map. So we are mapping with the server time as the key, and the value is the formatted date, and we return a string home because the handler method is returning a string. So as you may have seen before, because we have already specified a bean with the name internal resource view resolver, Spring will try to find out, based on the output coming from the home controller, I mean the home method, home, it will try to match a home.jsp because of that configuration. So here we have the home.jsp page. So it does nothing. We are just putting in the time of the server time, which you remember we had put in the home controller with the server time. That is a brief explanation of the Spring MVC project that was created by the wizard. The last thing that we are going to do, so I am not going to add any code into this project, because as is, this particular project is a working Spring MVC application. So the next thing that we are going to do is that without we adding any functionality to it, we are going to execute the application or deploy the application into an external server. So for that, what we are going to do, if you remember, we had already created the Tomcat server to deploy our application. So what we are going to do here is that I think I have already deployed it somewhere. So what we should do, or what you should do if it is the first time, just right click on the server that has been configured, go to the add remove program. So you can see the Spring application that we have created. Click on the add to add that particular application to the server. Once you publish, if you click on the publish, the code will be published to the corresponding location. So just as a refresher, if you remember, the location had been configured here as fmyjava Apache Tomcat. Inside this is where my Apache Tomcat has been unzipped. And inside that particular Tomcat folder, I have a web apps folder. So this particular code, Spring Legacy, will go inside this web apps folder. That's all we need to do as a deployment process for development purpose at least. So the next thing that we are going to do, just right click on the server and give start. So let us wait for the applications to start up. So you can see this particular application is going to use the HTTP 8080 as the port. So let us wait for the application to start up and see whether our application or the application that was created by the wizard is running or working or not. So the last thing that we are going to do is that we are going to I am going to take an incognito window. I will just give localhost 8080 and the context path is Spring Legacy. So I will give after 8080 / Spring Legacy and press enter. So if everything goes well, as you can see, everything went well, and the hello world from the JSP and the time on the server when we hit that particular server is also there. So that's what I wanted to give you. So you can see this is the wizard that has been created. This is the MVC application that has been created by the wizard, and without we doing much. If you remember, we never touched anything. We made the pom.xml as is. Of course, we had the web.xml file as the deployment descriptor. We have the root context where there is no beans defined. We have the servlet context.xml file where we have some beans defined. And then the wizard has created a controller called the home controller, which is inside the com.spring.legacy, the top package, with a controller stereotype annotation as well as a request mapping annotation decorated onto a home, which is we call it as a handler method. So whenever somebody hit the root context, that's what you can actually see here. We have hit the root context Spring Legacy. So when we hit the Spring Legacy, it goes to the home method, creates a new date instance, and we put that particular date instance in the server time as a key and return the home.jsp page, which will be displayed in the home.jsp as a paragraph. So the next thing that we are going to do, so I hope you have a basic understanding of the Spring MVC, the legacy way. Again, what we are going to do here is that, because as you can see here, we are using the Spring version 3.1.1. You may be aware Spring 5 is out there. So what we are going to do is that we are going to deploy this thing in a servlet 3. As you can see, this Tomcat 8 is a servlet 3.0 servlet API implementation. So we can implement. So what we are going to do next is that we are going to eliminate the whole of XML files. We will, of course, we need to have this pom.xml file here because that is the project management. We have to have an XML file. But what we are going to do next, we are going to delete the web.xml file, all the XML files. And then we will try to create a Spring MVC application, the same MVC application. We are not going to create a new application. The same MVC application we are going to use, and we will get rid of all the XML files and try to develop an application by just using annotations.